This is only the second. I don't know if I can call this a series because it's the second one I've done ever. But is it even called? I think I called it just like, does it hold up? We're just looking at what are generally seen to be as classic movies in different genres and asking ourselves the tough questions about whether they actually still work as movies, whether they still work for most audiences today, and all that kind of stuff. Last time around, it was Breakfast at Tiffany's.
Wow.
Yeah, and this time we're going to talk about James and the Giant Peach, and I'm joined by my friend Tiarshay.
Hello, that's me.
He's over there, and well, for a few reasons I wanted you to be in on this discussion in particular, but one of the big ones is that you actually grew up with this movie.
I did.
So you know it a lot better than I do.
Yes.
Even though I saw it a few times. But more than anything, I ended up seeing the preview, the VHS preview for this movie about 300 times because it was in front of one of the ones we watched. I don't know if it was in front of Lion King or maybe Aladdin because we watched Aladdin a lot. But in front of those, there was a 2-minute preview for James the Giant Peach coming out on videotape. And so anything that was in that preview, I remember very well because I heard it so many times. So him losing the bugs that go into the ground, I remember that. I remember...
Well, he drops them.
Right.
He
smashes the
trips.
thing.
Yeah.
And he goes, and they go all over the place. And I remember, you were the spider in my window.
You were the spider in my window.
Yes.
I remember that line. And Centipede guy goes, da, when the shark thing is coming. I remember that.
What do we do?
I remember the shark guy. And that's pretty much it. So I hadn't seen the full movie again until today, or earlier today. So I got a refresher. But very loosely... we're going to talk about different aspects and kind of each make an argument, very unstructured, of whether or not it does still hold up.
I'm going to try to be as unbiased as possible and just go by the question that's being asked and not whether or not I still love the movie.
That's good. I mean, you're also welcome to talk about still loving the movie.
Oh, I will. I do.
It's all fair game.
I plan on it.
It's all fair game. But I do think eventually trying to get to the question of, does it hold up? Yeah, in sort of a more removed way. Yeah, I think there's value in that too. There's so much with this one. There's so much going into it, isn't there? The only extra information I can think of is context stuff, because there is a little bit of context that I think is important with this one. Mostly just that it came from a very specific time, and even more so, a very specific time within Disney animation history.
Did it?
And I think that's so important. But first up, and I mentioned this earlier off mic, I mentioned that this is one of those movies that gets mistakenly lumped into the Tim Burton filmography, even though it's not. But everybody had this idea of the Tim Burton style, right? And especially, I think it's most common with The Nightmare Before Christmas, where everybody says, oh, it's a Tim Burton movie. He didn't direct it. He was there. He was very instrumental in it, and I think the character designs were based on his drawings, so obviously there's a lot of him in that movie. But it was directed by Henry Selick, who was a classmate of his at Cal Arts, and they were coming up together, and I think they worked together on maybe a couple things in college. But after that, yeah, Tim Burton didn't want to direct Night Before Christmas, so he said, hey, buddy, I know you already. Do you want to direct this one? I don't have time. I need to do other stuff.
I don't have time for this peach.
Yeah, and then that was 93, was Nightmare Before Christmas. James and the Giant Peach was 96. So Tim Burton was very much still like the good boy that Hollywood liked, right? Because they're like, oh, it's weird enough, but it's still clearly accessible because lots of people are paying to see these movies. So we'll just let him do whatever. It's fine. And in particular, James and the Giant Peach, the original thing, Roald Dahl never let anybody buy the movie rights when he was still alive because he said, it's not going to be good. I guess he was fine with Chocolate Factory stuff and all the other nonsense that got made from his earlier stuff, but he didn't think the James and the Big Peach
maybe his
good.
Experience with those other ones made him go, maybe I'm not going to do this anymore.
But those were successful. Well, I don't know if
how successful was
I don't
Charlie
know
and
if
the Chocolate Factory
Wonka
when
made
it
a lot
first
of
came
money.
out?
Yeah, no, I don't think it made a lot of money at the box office. That was in the 70s. Clearly, in the next 20 years or so, I don't know, it did die in the 80s, maybe, I don't know, but surely you would have seen, hey, you know what, this had legs. It worked out okay. That was super low budget to begin with. So it was after he died that his widow said, no, it's fine. You can have the rights to James and the Giant Peach. It'll be fine. She has since said that she thinks he would have liked it, this movie version that was made. And I think just a little bit of knowledge of Henry Selick and his stuff helps in understanding of the film, I think for sure, especially that dream sequence, which we'll get back to later.
Yes.
And for anyone who's wondering what else, I mean, he did Coraline. Those are the big ones for him. Those are his big directorial things, right? He really likes stop motion. He really likes weird visuals. All of that said, I don't think in the end it feels like a lot of the other actual Tim Burton movies from around that time, or since he's gotten really bland in all the remakes that he's done in the decades since this one came around. And yeah, it didn't really even make its money back in the theaters. It was close. I think it said the budget was 38 and it made 37.7 million back at the box office internationally. Close. So it wasn't like a hit of any kind. But yeah, what I mentioned about like this being a specific moment within Disney history is that they, especially nowadays, we know them very, very well for not taking risks whatsoever. They will only do the stuff that is zero risk, really mainstream accessible, super easy to sell, super easy to distribute, that's almost guaranteed to make its money back. And they didn't always used to do that. In the 80s and 90s in particular, there was a little bit of, not experimentation, but a little bit more risk-taking for sure. They made some really bad live-action sci-fi stuff in the 80s that includes Tron, and I think Black Hole might have been the other one that I'm thinking of. And then, yeah, this was 96, so this was like smack dab in the middle of the Disney Renaissance as well. This is like on either side of Aladdin, Lion King, Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Pocahontas, and Pixar had just gotten started 1 year earlier. Toy Story came out in 95.
Wow.
Not a Disney property yet, but they're releasing really safe, family-friendly stuff that visually isn't all that interesting either. It all kind of looks the same. It's all based on musical theater structure. And then there's this, which outside of being kind of a musical too, in a weird way.
The numbers are really short, which I really enjoy. The
songs are very short. That's true.
It doesn't take too much away from the movie. It's just a quick little, let's sing this little song and then go back to our business.
And it's definitely not structured, like, it's not
very
really structured as a
songs.
musical. It's not structured as a musical like all those other Disney Renaissance things where, you know, we have the I Want song to establish what the character's motivation. Then we have, oh, here's the big bad guy song. Here's the conflict song, right? Here's the third act thing where everything's crazy and the tension is really high. It doesn't have that at all. It's basically just like, oh, people might like these songs. We'll throw them in there. Although they don't really feel shoehorned in, I think. They feel natural enough. And I don't think any realism is broken when it's a bunch of giant insects. It works.
Yeah.
It works for the reality of the movie.
The family song kind of stretches that boundary though, because it starts to have the doesn't he kind of like trip out a little bit where he's like in the universe and everything's spinning
and then
like
a mobile and their strings holding things up.
That's nice.
Yeah, but isn't there an argument to be made that the entire story is James tripping out to some degree?
Whatever.
Potentially dream stuff happening or
Sure.
And it's not even that we have to view that as, oh, the story didn't happen. It's more, it's that type of logic and storytelling where everything is the way it is so that James can self-actualize. It's all just there as an excuse.
Yeah, but I'm talking about for the musical aspect in particular, that was a song where it wasn't real life or whatever, because even if you think about when they're when they're hungry and they're cutting up the inside of the peach, all the stuff that happened in there seemed pretty doable, but they're not out in the universe, out in space, like shrinking down.
Yeah, but also the family song, I think, is meant to be the big song.
It is.
Because it comes kind of the latest, right? It's the last one.
Everybody joins in.
Yeah, and as for the backgrounds and this is obviously fake surrounding stuff, I think that plugs into something that's consistent for the whole movie, which is a connection to live theater. Because especially in the early live action stuff, a little bit with New York too, everything is made to be so obviously a movie set on a soundstage. Like it harkens back to like the 40s when sets were just not so great and they just looked like, oh, that's not the sky, that's a matte painting, you know, it's just some lighting on a background. And so it seems like a very specific move to say, look how fake this is, because it is cartoony, the characters are heightened and cartoony. It's not meant to be realistic at any point. So at the same time, when they get around to that song, yeah, it kind of makes sense. Like I could see that in a musical, like, you know what, now we have a backdrop and they're in space and things are kind of floating around. Or even just the something about the having the fence wrapped around the peach struck me as live theater set design stuff, where you have your one big set piece, but
You can move around on it.
You can move around on it. It's versatile. The performers can pose on it in different ways. You can have one or two characters have a heart-to-heart over here.
Yes.
You can use it for a big action thing happening in one other scene. So I felt that really strongly, the idea of like, it just kind of feels like putting on a play in a weird way. It's not that, oh, it was all a dream, it doesn't mean anything, but just that the level of reality is constantly heightened. It's never trying to be gritty, realistic, anything. Which is something I appreciate about it, because it also makes it different from the straight 2D animated stuff, where it's really easy to immerse yourself because it's all consistent. The world is consistent. Everything in that world makes sense, right, within its own logic. And this is just somewhere else. This is a very different setting and a very different tone as a result. That's enough background. But now we can get into good and bad points, like good and bad more specific things.
Okay.
If you have any of
Such
those.
as good points?
Sure, let's go good first.
Okay.
Good
Well, this
stuff.
one's, I guess, more of a personal one, and I already told you. This movie made me become nicer to spiders. It was where the spider lady was like, oh, well, you were nice to me first. It's in people's nature to naturally be afraid of me, whether I can help it or not. And I was like, you know what? That's true. It's not the spider's fault that I'm just afraid of it. I'm like, I don't want it to hurt me, and I don't necessarily want to hurt it. Maybe we're just both scared.
Right.
Thanks, James and the Giant Peach. So that's a positive point for me, number one.
Sure. Different perspective, right?
Yes.
Yeah. It humanizes, in a very literal way, it humanizes the insect characters a lot. And I guess the one that gets most fleshed out is the spider lady. Mm-hmm. Everyone else is just kind of there. I guess we get a little bit more with Centipede Man, but that's kind of it, really. Everybody else is pretty thin, you know.
Right. Ladybug is Mrs. Weasley.
Yes, right.
Basically.
Right. Oh, not the voice? Okay.
No, I just meant her personality.
I would have believed that too.
Oh,
yeah.
I'm sorry.
But yes, very nurturing. Well, the spider's nurturing too. Okay, that's a decent point though. Okay, that's a good positive. Good character work.
Okay, now you go.
Okay, I mean, overall, I think I would say that it's one of the better Roald Dahl adaptations in general.
Yes.
Which we might have to work together to try to think of all the ones that we're even aware of, because obviously we have Willy Wonka / Charlie Chocolate Factory
Matilda,
story.
BFG.
Matilda, BFG, I didn't
The
see the
Witches.
movie. The Witches.
Wow, I'm good at this.
But even among those, I do think it's a very good one. I mean, Matilda definitely tried to...
Oh, Fantastic Mr. Fox.
Fantastic Mr. Fox. That's a good point. Okay. But Matilda's a good example of one that came out around the same time and very much gets into the cartoony realism thing. I don't think as well. I don't think it did it quite as well as this one did, and like not the live action segments of this movie, which is another thing.
Yeah, one of the quotes says that the live action segments are crude. Did you read that?
Or crude.
Crude.
No, but that's just referring to the humor, I suppose. Yeah. I think the stop motion in particular, it maybe just animation in general, I think is better suited to a lot of Roald Dahl type stories, where it's just
Right.
classic chapter book kind of thing. Fantastical world, even if it has characters from our reality, more or less. Yeah, there's room for it to be wacky and weird, but still feel comforting and fun and light. And yeah, I don't get that from some of the other ones at all.
Do you wish that they would have done this whole movie just in animated like form, rather than just having him be human in the beginning, animated in the middle, human in the end, having to explain the animated part to other people?
I mean, potentially, someone claims on the internet that Henry Selick did consider doing the whole thing in stop motion, and it says that he decided not to in the end to save money, like it would be less expensive if they didn't, which I don't know if I believe. It kind of feels like there were maybe some conversations there, and they're like, hey, it's going to take a whole lot longer if you animate the whole thing as opposed to doing a bunch of live action stuff, and it's going to cost more. I believe that part for sure.
Did the Pagemaster come out before or after this movie?
I mean, I'm not the one to answer that question, but I'm sure we can find it.
Because they follow the same formatting.
Well, so did a lot of 80s stuff, and not even just 80s children's movies, but like that was a pretty common shtick. And like obviously, I think we can even draw comparisons back to The Good Wizard of Oz from the 30s. It's not the first Wizard of Oz movie, but it's the good one that everybody likes. But it had that really good gimmick / hook of, oh, straight sepia film stock, and then we're going to move to the colorized stuff for the bulk for the Fantasyland. There's a big transition. It's very exciting. And that happened with a lot of 80s sci-fi stuff and fantasy stuff. Disney tried to bring it back with Enchanted. Remember, it's the reverse, where it starts with the animation. Who Framed Roger Rabbit was a Disney release in the 80s. That was the whole gimmick there, was combining both in the same frame.
Right.
So I kind of do wish it didn't have that transition, just because I hate the live action sequences so much. In fact, I'd be curious to know whether just a different person directed those scenes, because they're so different and bad and dated. And I guess I may as well say that now, but in terms of looking at the whole movie and saying whether it feels dated and out of touch,
it's the live action.
Only that stuff does.
Right.
Only that stuff does. And for one thing, because it's bad, but also because that was a trend for kind of a long time of the cartoony realism, but within a live action context. And off the top of my head, I thought of, obviously, Beetlejuice got into that for sure. Tim Burton connection there. Mouse Hunt with Nathan Lane. Remember Mouse Hunt?
Yeah.
101 and 102 Dalmatians, the live action ones with Glenn Close. Crime Wave was a collaboration between Sam Raimi and the Coen brothers before the Coen brothers had any kind of gravitas. And it's one of my least favorite things that I've ever seen visually of any kind. Is awful. But I always hated that style. I always hated that, we're going to do like cartoon sound effects and the guys, the bad guys get thrown across the room as if it is a cartoon thing. I never liked it. It always felt claustrophobic and awful to me. And so I think just the fact that the comedy in those live action scenes here adheres to that is such a detriment, and it takes away so many points that the movie would get otherwise. That stuff definitely does feel dated, and it really makes it more difficult to argue in favor of this movie holding up. I think that's where I am on that.
I agree. The live action segments definitely drag it way down for me. The animated is always my favorite part, but I mean the two aunts are just really, really scary, I think. And I think them being animated would be terrifying.
But interesting. They would just look like characters from like Corpse Bride or something, essentially. Right. No, I mean, and there are some decent sinister moments in this that all comes from the animation, of course. We get the rhino. The cloud rhino is pretty cool.
Yes.
I liked that effect a lot. And back in line with it being a sort of heightened reality just for James's benefit, there's also a trend of, I guess we'll call them like visual motifs, I suppose, where we just get certain imagery at different times, even if there's no logic for that imagery to be in that particular scene. It shows up anyway. The rhino, of course, is iterated on a couple different times. It's also the hood ornament of the ant's car. And the ants' faces show up on a wrecked ship in the underwater scene.
Right.
And it's like, it's not about, you're not supposed to say, why is that? Why would someone carve their faces into the cartoon ship? Like, no, it's just to symbolize, no, this is the bad part. This is the stuff that James is afraid of. It is ultimately about his fear and overcoming that fear. And it's that same kind of reality. And I think that stuff works very well. And I think that's evidence, too, that all of the live action stuff would have done just as fine or much, much better if animated, just visually even.
Would you say that this is a type of Disney movie that they would remake?
They're working on remaking it.
For real?
At least there have been extensive talks of a remake. I forget which director they said
oh
they
my
had signed
goodness.
on. They've been talking about remaking it, and that is worrying because what do you even do?
We'll send them this recording.
They're not going to make it stop motion, of course.
How do you know?
Because it's Disney, and that would be way too expensive and take way too much time. So there's that. Not to mention, they had previously made some kind of deal with Selick in the early 2010s to produce more stuff for them, but none of it was going to be stop motion, I don't think, or at least none of it was going to be related to James and the Giant Peach.
I wonder who they would cast.
A bunch of British people.
Oprah as
It'd be
Ladybug.
a bunch of British people. Sam Rockwell would be the centipede guy from Brooklyn. Although he wouldn't be from Brooklyn, he would be from somewhere slightly different.
Yorkshire.
But I'm not interested in that. I kind of even doubt that it would end up getting made now, except as a streaming exclusive.
Sure.
I could see that, but that immediately means a lower budget. I don't see it. And I guess that brings us to another pretty relevant point, which is, do people know about this movie now?
Yes.
Who, though?
Me.
Just people our age, you're
Yes.
thinking. Do young people today know this movie exists?
They probably would recognize, like, the cover of the movie. Or, like, I think that they would know that it exists. They probably wouldn't have seen it. But they'd be like, oh, James and Giant Peach. Yeah, sure.
I don't know if I agree with that. I think it's been largely forgotten, at least in terms of like dominant cultural context. Because all the Disney Renaissance stuff, of course, people still watch that stuff. They're still very popular. I could see kids enjoying those without any hitch.
Yeah, I mean, you could say that about a lot of the older Disney movies.
Yes, and I'm saying it about this one for sure. And it has an uphill battle as well with finding new audiences because it is so different in so many ways, both from what was coming out at the time and especially based on the kids' entertainment that's coming out now, at least in terms of feature films. So I think immediately there are difficulties for it to find that renewed audience outside of people who think, oh, this is somewhat obscure, it'll be kind of cool. Like, I don't want to like what the other kids like.
Yeah.
I'm going to be the edgy one. It's a very tame story.
It's a very tame, like, gentle adventure.
The story itself, the storytelling's very safe and light and fun and well-paced. And it doesn't get very boring, but visually alone is so different. If we took 10 screenshots from fucking Tangled, both Frozen movies, Moana, etc. The lighting, nothing in those movies is ever going to be lit this dark. The color palette's never going to be so desaturated. Mm-hmm. The character models are never going to be anything other than that awful convergent action figure face that is the basis for all Disney animation now, that just looks exactly the same.
He would have had like a little companion, like mini pig with him on this adventure.
Right,
if it was
a very
made
cute,
now.
round animal companion.
So what would James and Giant Peach look like right now? Like if it were to be presented?
It would be CG for sure. It would be slightly sanitized, which just means not even vaguely scary moments. That would be removed, or at least way
Do you think he'd have some sort of power?
A power?
Power of the peach?
Maybe like a special... He's an inventor, and he's a girl now, by the way.
Right.
And she's into STEM.
Jamie.
And she knows how to alter the peach in ways to catch the wind just right.
Yes.
And save them from different situations. Which James kind of has in this, like the ingenuity aspect of, oh,
let's get the seagulls.
I have a smart way. Yeah, the seagulls, I guess, is the one thing.
That's all it takes.
The underwater stuff is kind of just general bravery, I suppose. Like, oh, we gotta help our friend. But anyway, that's the one point that I can really dig into here of why, maybe regardless of the specifics of this movie, why it should really stick around and be considered a classic just for the sake of more people finding it potentially. It's just that it's really, really, really important to provide some kind of both tonal and visual variety in children's entertainment. And at least right now, not that I'm super tapped into what all the kids are watching, especially under 10 years old, but like in general, there has been a shift towards really colorful, oversaturated CG stuff.
Yes.
And not that there's anything necessarily wrong with that, but there is very little variety because everything that's made is greenlit based on, well, what was successful before. Those ruts have been carved, so there's less risk if we just do something really similar to all that stuff that had success previously. And yeah, I don't know. It has comparisons to other mediums too, where like I've heard this a lot about like what kinds of music people are trained to listen to in the West, especially. There's a huge resistance to traditional Eastern music and atonal stuff because, for one, they're working in different musical modes. They're using different scales and they're using different chords, key signatures, all that stuff. The music theory is all very different behind that stuff. And if someone says, "Oh, I don't like how this sounds," it's not an objective thing. It's just that they haven't listened to a lot of it. And if they're not exposed to very different things when they're growing up, there's very little chance of them coming around the bend anytime later in life.
Well,
and I think a similar thing applies here where, oh no, if all we're showing is stuff that conforms to a very specific visual style and tone and even color palette, where is there room for anything different?
That's very interesting to say.
So that's what this just looks different. It looks so different. It was a somewhat big budget stop motion thing at the time.
It wouldn't be popular with the kids today.
You don't think it would be popular? Okay.
I don't think so.
I think it would depend on the kids, yeah, but like maybe edgy tweens would potentially pick up on it and say it's kind of neat, you know.
For smaller kids, I don't think they would be as entertained. But, I mean, some kids would watch it, whatever. There is color, it's orange.
But visually, very, very starkly different to just a lot of mainstream entertainment today that's designed for children. So so that's one thing ultimately in its favor, I guess, for holding up is it's at least it's something different. It was something different at the time, and it still remains something different, especially within children's entertainment. Other good things, so we might have to move on to the other side of the equation.
Well, I mean, I'll talk about how it's a good story for, like, grief and family and things like that. Very good story.
I agree.
James's relationship with those bugs, it's kind of, it's weird, but if you pretend that they're humans and they're just like a family surrounding a kid after losing parents, it's super, super beautiful because he feels so alone and so like not cared for the whole time. He just feels like he's not, I don't know. It's cute.
Yeah, no, it's one entry in the very prolific subgenre of found family movies, right? As opposed to biological family movies. In particular, I can think of one filmmaker who's stuck to that theme for pretty much his whole career, and it's a good old Wes Anderson. Pretty much every one of his movies is about the family you choose, as opposed to the family you're born into. Not discounting one or the other, but it's been a very big thing, including with his Roald Dahl adaptation, Fantastic Mr. Fox. They have the big dinner table scene underground. They're like, this is it. It's community. It's everybody together. We've been forced into this situation, but it's okay. We're better for it. We enhance each other. Yeah, no, it's definitely another positive. Yeah, it is a nice... It's looking at those heavier subjects with a good amount of distance and fragility. It's not deep diving into death of parents, but it's there. It is getting into that subject matter.
Yeah, there's a lot of... The movie leaves a lot of things up for interpretation for people. Like, they're just like, we're going to make this happen, and you can ask questions about why or how or when, but we're not going to answer that, and we're going to continue to move on. Like, even the guy who gives James the green things.
Yes.
Who is he?
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
What's the story?
No,
he comes back later to demand for James to be allowed to speak later, and then everyone starts to agree, and we hear James speak, and then we see him at the end, and that's pretty much it. And I'm not mad at it.
Yes, he speaks to the audience. Yeah, he's almost a narrator figure, or like interlocutor. I'm trying to think of other theater roles that kind of fill that purpose. But yeah, no, absolutely. It's another thing where he's just there because he needs to be there for the story. Don't think about it. It's not important. Yeah, no, he works well. The look is still a little questionable.
I love the look.
It's
fingerless gloves all
day.
Like
a pirate or something. I don't know. He has like epaulets.
They won't tell you.
Well, I've talked about a lot of the bad stuff already, which is live action stuff is awful. The comedy's very, very dated, as well as a lot of the visuals. I hate all of those parts.
Poor James.
And yeah, cartoony live action, not a big fan. I think that's, the biggest detriment.
Disagree.
And the other biggest detriment for me personally is the Randy Newman score. Absolutely.
No.
And he did do the music, and I like the family song, okay. That's the one where I'm like, this is kind of a fun tune. This is all right.
What about the when they're making the peaches?
Everything else I forget instantly.
No.
But in particular, the incidental score music that's not, set to lyrics or anything like that. I wish I knew more music theory so I could point to a really specific thing, but he uses the same chords, intervals, instrumentation, and I bet even key signatures in every single movie project that he's ever worked on, including Princess and the Frog and all the Toy Story movies and everything else. And it sounds exactly the same. To the point where if you just play some of the score music from the movie out of context, I would think it's from Toy Story because it's the exact same stuff. I wouldn't be surprised if he just had offcuts from Toy Story, which he did the year before. And just said, here you go, whatever. It's something light. There you go. It's Andy's room. You need something sad? Oh, okay. Here's the sad sound, the one sad sound that I do. And I hate it. I hate it a lot because it prevents the movie from feeling more distinct. If it had a really unique and interesting score from just some guy, some professional score composer guy, and it got to have its own identity, that would be such a bonus. Anyway, the biggest negatives for me: score, live action segments, they get in the way, but at the same time, I don't think they're enough to completely pull it down and say, like, oh, no, this is...
I'm not going to watch it because the score sucks.
Yeah. Or that other people shouldn't watch it because of these things that I don't happen to like. But yeah, overall, no, I mean, I would totally say that holds up.
Really?
That's mine, yeah. I mean, not 100% of it, but certainly there's enough there. And like I was saying, the variety it provides within that space of children's entertainment, I think is important beyond just this particular movie. But how do you feel about it?
I feel like it holds up. Like when you told me that you were going to be watching James and Giant Peach, I got excited.
Right.
Because it's a movie that makes me smile. I did grow up with it, so I have that nostalgic feeling whenever I think about it or watch it.
Right.
But I feel like even if I didn't grow up with it and it was just a movie that I was watching with you today, then I still would have enjoyed it. So I guess that in itself means that it holds up. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it as a movie by itself without whatever.
No, I think that's totally fair. Now, whether or not people will, new people will watch it, I don't know. I mean, it is on Disney Plus, so it's there. Right?
I hope so. I mean, I think even all of the bugs, the like James, of course, is the center of the story, but even the bugs have stuff going on, likes and dislikes, and learn to get along with each other. So there's those aspects as well that I enjoyed. Like the grasshopper and the centipede getting along, Ladybug and the spider, and then the glowworm. She's just the best. She's a really great character, and they all hold up well. Even the fact that the glowworm is supposed to be just kind of like the senile woman, and who it's still the jokes of her not being able to hear and not being able to participate still hold up in a way that's not offensive.
No, it's not mean-spirited.
It doesn't make me cringe when I hear her say like, oh, marvelous pigs in satin, and things like that, which other movies from the time of James and Giant Peach, some of the jokes that they made to establish that a character was less than all there would be cringy. So
yes, that's true.
That definitely holds up.
Yeah, no, it is kind of funny. It's kind of a funny movie. Yeah, it's not. I wouldn't call it a comedy necessarily. Right. It's funny. The characters have just enough. The ensemble cast, they have just enough to distinguish them from each other. At the same time, I don't know. I feel like they're also not limited to I don't know if this is a thing, but insect stereotypes. Like
the Ladybug says, this is so un-Ladybug-like.
Well, there's that, I suppose. But the centipede, I don't know. He likes to fight. Okay, I guess that's
because he's from Brooklyn.
I don't know if that's a centipede thing or it's just a fun visual thing. But it works very well. I liked the little grasshopper shtick
versus crickets.
Yeah, how he's elitist against crickets because they only use their bodies to make music and not man-made instruments. And the worm, he's barely there.
He's just kind of like a hypochondriac type of character who's just worried about everything.
Yeah, okay.
But we appreciate him. He used himself as bait. Very, very brave.
What was that shark thing anyway? What was that?
It was because you remember at the beginning of the movie, part of his job was to cook food for his aunts, and they like those fish heads, which are really gross, and he hates them. And so one of the obstacles that he meets out there is that mechanical shark that's sucking up the fishes and pooping out those fish heads that were what his aunt used to have him prepare. So then the thing was trying to suck them down too.
So it was just a manifestation of something from Wizard of Oz. Sure. Yeah, a lot of stuff. Okay. No, that's cool. I guess just the design. I thought the design was neat.
Oh, that was terrifying. I'm like, this is over.
Awfully yonic, isn't it?
Scary.
And that's the closing arguments, I think. I don't know.
And another good point is that I think Susan Sarandon does a really good French accent. She does great.
It's not bad. Yeah, no, it's good for the character.
Yes, it's good for the character.
I don't know if she speaks French or anything, but no, it works.
I hope she doesn't. I hope that she wasn't supposed to be French and she went in and saw the character design and was like, you know what? I'm going to go for it.
No, good cast overall. Yeah, definitely a bunch of people that I wasn't aware of as a child who are fairly respected performers. So it's nice to see that. And I do think it was also a good move to go with a lot of British people because none of it had to be. There's no reason for so many characters to be British or for it to be set in the UK initially or anything like that. But it works. It gives it it works for kind of the children's book feel for some reason. Maybe just because it's been done a lot before. But yeah, great casting choices. I think you mentioned that the kid had a bad experience, so he stopped acting.
Yeah, Paul Terry, poor kid, got bit by a spider.
Yeah, it's not like he was a standout. This wasn't necessarily
he was not.
Role.
That was my negative for the movie, is I don't think he did a good job, or like he pulled me out of the story a lot.
Yeah, he wasn't that great.
But he's a child actor, so that's okay.
Maybe they started with the puppet and just had to find a kid who looked like it. And in general, I think the character, and I think this holds true for a decent number of Roald Dahl characters as well, where like the protagonist is pretty plain and doesn't have a lot of reason to be there. It's mostly like, you're the hero because you are. Hey, good job. Here you go. I guess Charlie of the Wonka story is like kind of a good person, so it's supposed to be like a morality tale kind of thing. But in this one especially, it's like, oh, he had tragedy, and it's just about him dealing with that tragedy. It's not like he's especially interesting or fun to follow. So yeah, even the material, I don't know if that kid had much to work with when he was reading the lines. That's that.
The scene that I'm thinking of is just when he steps up on the truck and is like, when New York was not anything, it started out as a dream, and I rode here on a peach, so you can't tell me that wasn't real, because these lights are real and they weren't once before.
Yeah, that's not even part of the thing. Like, is he a dreamer? Is that what the whole thing's been about? No, not really. He stumbles into a situation and he's like, okay, this is my life now. This is what I'm doing.
I'm gonna live in a pit.
So, yeah, he does end up living in a pit, which I can't imagine would have been all that big.
I know.
I feel like it would have been a lot smaller than what they showed, but...
The movie ends with James, like, telling the story of the...
He tells the story of the
but
peach.
really bad, and he keeps saying the seagulls and doing arm motions.
Yeah.
So that is my last negative point that I have, is that James is a bad reteller of the story.
It's not a strong ending. Really. Dream sequence. No, it's good, and more specifically, it's a very direct, let's say, spiritual successor to one of Henry Selick's old short films called Slow Bob and the Lower Dimensions, which if you ever want a trip, go ahead and check it out. It also technically pays some homage to some famous stop-motion filmmakers of the past, particularly Terry Gilliam and Jan Schwankmeyer, who inspired Terry Gilliam as well, but specifically using paper cutouts for faces, and then everything else is very 2D, just kind of shuffling things around and having mixed media and different objects fly into frame and stuff like that. So there is some influence there from other stop motion stuff.
Is that the type of stuff that you think you would see in animation right now? Like, would you see a scene like that slammed in somewhere?
In an indie, yeah, but not a major studio even if a major studio did make a stop motion movie. I don't think so. I don't think they would do anything all that wacky. But yeah, certainly in the independent scene, I could see it happening. And even like Anomalisa's kind of done stuff like that with the surreal face peeling stuff, and that's it with the movie. That's all there is, really.
Marvelous things will happen.
Certainly worth a rewatch, even if just to remember things from the childhood viewing. If you haven't seen it, it is there now, and you can log into someone else's Disney Plus account to check it out so you don't have to give them any money. Happy to hear opinions from other folks on whether it does hold up. So I'd like to thank Tierche for stopping by for this episode and contributing to the discussion.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's been great. Until the next time, I guess.